is Geert van der Kruijsen, Cloud Native Architect at Xpirit, and I'll be the host for today. Today we will start with the leadership track, where we have a lot of cool guests who can talk about what ISVs, what the opportunities for ISVs are using the cloud, what certain pitfalls were, or how they actually use the cloud. After this track, in the afternoon, we will have a technical track as well, where we will have two topics, a bit more technical for developers regarding data privacy, and one topic about identity in the cloud. But first, leadership track. We have 4 guests here in the studio, so let me briefly introduce them. Our first guest here, Marcel de Vries. He's the CTO and founder of Xpirit. And as Xpirit is a consulting company helping other companies build cloud solutions, software as a service solutions. So welcome, Marcel.
Thank you.
What does Xpirit and ISVs, what makes it that really works?
Well, what you see is that we as a consulting firm strongly believe in the fact that we should first help you out making things happen, then show you how you can do it yourself, and then finally do it yourself. And that is a little bit different than the normal consulting firm where you want to be there for the rest of the entire life cycle of a product. And why that's a good fit with ISVs is that we can really bootstrap ISVs into their journey if it comes to moving from their on-premise installations to, okay, how do I move this existing software to more cloud native and make it cloud optimized at the end, and then teach them and learn them how to become cloud native, building their culture, making the changes throughout the organization, but of course, all about the engineering part of that as well. So we help them with the architecture, we help them with the transition in practices if it comes to how do you do your software development in this cloud native world. And then, finally, once we're done there, they are completely on their own. They can run their own business and they don't need us anymore. So, and that is really where we think have a great match with ISVs because, they really need to be bootstrapped into this new era of SaaS software.
Okay, great. So after the introductions, Marcel will actually do a presentation, an inspirational session on what the cloud can offer for ISVs and certain things. Xpirit learned working with ISVs over the past years. Yep. So our next guest, Cornell van der Heijden, VP of Technology at Nextens.
Yes, very true.
Great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
You're leading the technology team at Nextens, working a lot with the cloud. You build software for the fiscal and tax area as a software as a service solution. So it's great to have someone from the field giving his insights in what you learned. Thanks for being here.
Sure.
Can you still imagine a world at Nextens without the cloud?
No, I don't think we can. And there's a lot to that, and I'll share that later. Our software started out on a floppy disk. Okay, so we started out in 1984 building software that was very, very limited in use and features. But today we can scale almost like unlimitedly to an extent where if we would be buying servers to do the exact same thing, we would spend massive amounts of money on that. And I think next to the fact that we get a lot of benefit from being able to scale that fast, we also see that, you learn new things every day, right? It becomes more interesting every day to be in the cloud because there's new features, there's new products, there's new options that you can use. So I don't think we can imagine a world without the cloud. Yes.
Okay. Great to have someone actually from the field sharing their experience. So after Marcel's talk, Cornell will also take the stage and tell us a bit more about the journey you went through and the learnings you had. So working as an ISV, if you're watching and you're working as an ISV, hopefully you can learn about certain pitfalls you encountered during your your transformation towards the cloud and towards a SaaS solution. Then our third guest, Alex de Groot.
Good morning.
Good morning. A consultant at Xpirit, focusing on working with ISVs. You have a great passion in working in the ISV area.
Yeah, I rolled into a product company 14, 15 years ago, not really aware what was the difference between solutions and products. But it turned out to be the case that it's a total different play field. It's a solution is there for 3 to 5 years. A product is there for 15 years typically. So you are in a total different world when you come to the product world. And over time, I actually had the opportunity together with Xpirit to work with many different vendors. Also with some which had their started with hardware, like a typical ISV selling boxes and software, but also the ones which are started off with software. And it's a great opportunity because you see that also these sort of these time scales of 10, 15 years, they are becoming shorter in the cloud. So it's an enormous, it's a great opportunity to learn from these sort of companies and also to see this world change.
Yeah, great to have you on the show. You're here for, we're actually in a live broadcast here. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can ask your questions for anyone at the table. So we have a lot of expertise here. So if you have any questions, let them know in the chat. I will check them and I will pass them on to our guests. So our last guest, Fabian Klein-Schiphorst, a customer success lead at Microsoft.
Good morning.
Good morning. So Fabian, you work at the other side of the cloud, right?
Yeah.
Looking at Cornell here, who's actually a ISV using the cloud. You work at Microsoft, a cloud provider. So it's also good to have that at the table. You work with customers using the cloud as well. Yep. How do you see ISVs from a Microsoft perspective? Are ISVs, do they play an important role in the roadmap of Azure and how Microsoft looks at cloud customers?
Yeah, so I think ISVs are playing a crucial role in the history of Microsoft even. So you just shared that you started with floppy disk. I think at the start of Microsoft, we were a platform company providing Windows. And we needed ISVs to extend the functionality of Windows, and later came Office, and we needed ISVs to extend that, and with Windows Server. So I think we have a more than 40-year-old history of working with ISVs, and we need ISVs to extend our functionality and extend our platform. Today with cloud, I think ISVs play even a more important role on a couple of areas. So first and foremost, ISVs push the limits of our cloud technology. And so having ISVs on our platform will push any service that they use. And that push helps us to make the platform more reliable, to provide more functionality also to enterprise customers or to other customers. That's one. Second, in today's cloud world, we still provide a platform, and with the notion of industry clouds, we provide an additional, let's say, platform for ISVs like yourself, where you can extend the industry framework that we have. And an industry cloud, for example, for FSI is built in the end on the Office 365 business apps and Azure, and we provide a platform to even go a step further and make it industry specific. So long answer to your question, but in the short version, it's yes, they are crucial to push the limits of our technology.
Okay, great to have you all here on the show. Well, with no further ado, let's dive into our first talk by Marcel. So we're going to shift it around a bit. Let me make room for you.
Thank you.
So if you two could...
I will give you your water.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Keep things a little bit tidy. Okay, well, thank you all for tuning into our live stream today. And let me start by welcoming all of you on the live stream. And let me give you more or less an insight on the trends that we see in the industry going on at the moment, and how ISVs can embrace the capabilities of the cloud and the capabilities that are coming to the market to improve their services to their end customers. So first of all, let me start with dipping our toes a little bit into what are the big trends at the moment going on in our IT industry. And if it comes to those big changes, some of them are not always as visible as you might think. One of the things that is constantly going on at the moment is that the software that we write nowadays is more and more and more complex every day. What you see is that the complexity is increasing in such a way that it's way harder to actually envision what is all part or has become part of your software nowadays. And with that, since we are building on the shoulders of giants if it comes to building our own software, we're not building the OS anymore, we're not building all the frameworks anymore, we're just using the frameworks as they are, all of a sudden we are also exposed to much more vulnerabilities that might be in those libraries that we're using, in those operating systems that we're using. And what we see is that there is a high increase in the number of vulnerabilities that our software is all of a sudden exposed to. Now, if you take a look at the increased complexity and these known vulnerabilities or the additional vulnerabilities that are found in our software, how do we manage all these dependencies that we have? I mean, if you build a very simple web application nowadays, for example, on Angular or on React, you have the whole Node NPM ecosystem that you pull in, and the number of packages just for a normal Hello World website is about 200 packages that you just pull in just to do even simple string concatenations. Now, what happens is that because we have all the dependencies, we also have to deal with the fact that these dependencies are updated all the time. So then you have to ask yourself the question, what is going on when I'm not touching my software anymore for just a couple of days or a couple of weeks? And this is where I see that we, sometimes the software engineers are like frogs in a can of boiled water, or boiling the water slowly. That we are not always aware of the fact that these things are affecting us constantly. Because if we nowadays don't touch our software for, let's say, a month or let's say half a year, can you still compile that software even? Does it even compile anymore? And what we see is that there's this new way or this new thing that is happening into our industry. In the past, we had this problem with hard drives where all of a sudden we had some spots in the magnetic fields where we lost bits. But nowadays we have another form of bit rot that is all of a sudden taking place, and that is your software, even in a repository, very tightly, nicely version controlled, still might not compile anymore, and it's not even the ability to roll it out anymore to any place that you would like. So these are challenges from an engineering perspective that are taking place in our industry. Now, the other thing, of course, and that's why we are here today at Club Cloud, is what is happening, what happens when you see that the whole way we look at data centers and the whole paradigm around data centers is shifting. I mean, you were just saying that you couldn't imagine working on real hardware anymore, and you need the cloud to enable the features to your customer. But we still see that a lot of ISVs that we talk to think of the cloud as if it was your grandmom's phone, right? But what if the cloud is not your grandmom's phone anymore, but this is actually the disruption going on? Because you can still make phone calls with this. So it's like, your data center, you can use the cloud as a data center, but if you're using it as a data center, then all of a sudden you're not really looking at what is possible and unlocking those capabilities and possibilities to also mitigate some of the issues that I just stated. So it's really important and crucial to understand the cloud is just not another data center. It's a completely different paradigm, completely different way of doing things. And this is also what probably Nextsense has experienced with the fact that when you normally buy hardware, it's a large investment. And then if you only have peak loads at a certain moment in the year, you all of a sudden need to over-provision and buy all that hardware to make that happen. In the cloud, that doesn't work anymore that way. You only scale up a little bit and then you scale down again, and you only pay for the overage that you needed for a couple of minutes even, or a couple of hours, or a couple of days. Now the other shifts that are happening in our industry, and I think they are not that ancient anymore, is that you see a big move to the agile way of work. I mean, if you come to a software development company and you see people still doing the waterfall thing, then a lot of eyebrows will be frowned, like, okay, why aren't we using agile? And then, of course, but that's more my personal opinion, then we see a lot of companies move to the SAFe framework, which is just another way of doing waterfall, but then you call it agile. But what you see is really agility is crucial to be always shipping and always be compiling and always be delivering value to your customer. And then if you look at the other influences that are happening, is the influence in the industry if it comes to the way we think about delivering software. In the past, it was more like an engineering practice. People thought that let's look at how engineering is done in buildings, where we first make large designs, and after the grand designs, we then come up with all the details, and then after the final details, we actually deliver the product. But nowadays, we look more at the auto industry and Toyota, lean manufacturing, which has really changed the industry in the way we deliver our software. And we are in a constant delivery mode towards our customers, and we need to figure out ways to make that happen in such a way that we don't slow down on our availability of our system. Our system needs to be up 99.9 whatever nines you want to have as an ISV, but still you want to deliver like 30 new changes a day, and you need to have that flexibility, but on the other hand the stability that you have here. So what you see is that the big trends in our industry are, of course, the move to what is being called DevOps, also better known in more like managerial books as a high-performance IT organization that you want to set up. And then you see that you can have a much higher deployment frequencies. You can have way less downtime because you're delivering smaller pieces to the customer all the time. And then about 2 years ago, we saw all of a sudden that, especially with cloud in play, that we have this new initiative going on, which is called site reliability engineering. And site reliability engineering is taking this one step further, where we say, well, instead of just building software and we make it as stable as possible, we now cater in, or we design and develop our software for the fact that things will break. And how can we have some kind of degradation of performance or some degradation of functionality, but still be up and running with our business? So site reliability engineering is a whole new practice that is coming to play, that is crucially important to be successful in delivering your software to your customers. And then finally, one of the other important trends is what we call consumerization of IT. And what do I mean by that is that people expect software just to be there. They expect to have updates all the time because that's what they've been used to as a consumer. Nowadays, if you have a television, how many times a week do you need to install new software on your television, right? It is constantly updated and it's done in place, and it's not disrupting you anymore. So from a software vendor perspective, that's also an important thing to take into account. How do I deliver these new capabilities, those new features to my customer without having these disruptions or downtimes? I think it was even 2 years ago that I still see these messages from my bank that they say, well, we won't be processing any transactions for the next 5 hours because we're doing a software update. You go, okay, weren't we already surpassed that whole idea? But of course, it takes time to migrate or convert your software to something that is more in this space of consumerization of IT and in this space of cloud and another way of delivering. So if you see all these trends happening in our industry, then you can ask yourself, what is the impact on software vendors? What is the impact on the ISVs? And one of the important things that is happening is that this customer, this end customer, all of a sudden says, well, I don't want your downloadable zip file that I can install on my own cloud or that I can install on my own machines. I just want the software to be there, to be available. I just want to log in, and preferably not another username and password, but just something that I already have. And then I need to rethink the way I deliver this software to my customers, because this has many implications to the way that you've been used to deliver software. And one of the important changes is that if you are moving from I deliver the software to the customer and the customer runs that on their hardware and they need to more or less maintain that, all of a sudden you're now moving towards a 24/7 operation. Because if your software is available online all the time, you can't afford any downtime anymore, and you need to be there 366 days, because even in a leap year you want to be there if it comes to availability. The other thing is that if you build your software to run on other people's computer, now imagine that you are starting to host that in terms of like, I'm just doing managed service provider kind of capability. I just install the software that I normally deliver to my customer. I install it myself. And then my customer can just log into the system that I am hosting. So I'm becoming a managed service provider for my own software. But what happens with the total cost of ownership? All of a sudden, the cost of ownership that was at your customer is now a cost that you need to incur as an ISV. And that has tremendous impact on your revenue and your bottom line if it comes to being a successful ISV company. And able to mitigate that problem, you really need to look at your software architecture. The software architecture that most ISVs build on was the architecture that was, like 2 decades ago, a very viable architecture. But nowadays, it's not about one big database with client server and some web application on top of that. No, you need to really rethink, how can I have certain capabilities that are still online while others are taken offline. And this is where you see trends like microservices coming in and other ways to deploy and deliver that software. And that needs a lot of rework if it comes to the existing software that you have. And then there's another important piece here which has nothing to do with technology, but has to do with how do you organize all of that. Because if you are moving from an organization that was used to sell licenses and sell software and install that at other people's computer, now all of a sudden you are a 24/7 operation. You need to deploy constantly. You need to take into account all these trends that I just told you about to keep the software up to date, secure, and available. And that has a high implication on the way you organize yourself. And to enable this type of organization, there's one very important thing that needs to happen, and that's a change in the way leadership works. So you really need a different way of leading such an operation, and that requires a complete different approach than the traditional Anglo-Saxon way of hierarchical, more or less delivery of your organization. What you see there is that you need to form these more autonomous teams that can deliver in autonomy, embrace those DevOps capabilities, and embrace the tooling to do constant delivery of value to the customers. That means that you need to unlock and enable those people. And then you need to look at, okay, but now I have this concept of cloud. I have a whole new of organizing myself. And oh, by the way, I have also this software that I need to transform. So the impact on ISVs on what is going on at the moment in the market is tremendous. And it's a lot to take in. But there are also a lot of opportunities here. And if you look at the opportunities that are there for the ISVs, then you can look at, for example, the whole concept of pay-per-use. Because instead of your traditional model where every, let's say, 2 to 3 years you need to buy new hardware, you can now say, okay, let's say that my software is not architected that bad. I could just do a lift and shift. I always call it lift and shift-ish, because sometimes you make a little tweaks there so that you don't all of a sudden pay major prices. But then you can move to a different model where you don't have these hardware investments all of the time, where you have to spend like $500,000 or even $1 million on hardware before something can actually run. But then you go into more an operational expense model where you say, well, my constant burn rate has a certain certain velocity. And this creates opportunity, and the opportunity it creates is that all of a sudden you have cash available, which is working capital that you can use, which normally would be in the machines or would be in your hardware investments, and now all of a sudden you can take that money and then use that to do investments in your software. So it's also, from an accounting perspective, a different way of looking at how you deliver this software. And this can create tremendous opportunities, because if you look at the green line here where you see the burn rate, if you would normally just incur the TCO of running the software on your own hardware, you can now have a look at, okay, what will I do with this bucket of money? Will I then go for the orange line here, which is more or less the green line that we saw in the previous graph, where you say, well, I just keep the software running and just run it on VMs, on infrastructure as code, on infrastructure in the cloud. But I can also say, well, I might need to do a little bit of an investment, and then all of a sudden I go to the more brownish line where we need to incur some costs, but I can then flatten my operational expense, my OPEX. And then even you might say, well, if we do this additional thing, then we can even take an additional investment and then flatten that curve completely. And this is where we then go to really serverless solutions, cloud-native solutions that are out there, which of course requires some kind of refactoring of your software, but still can give you huge benefits if it comes to your total cost of ownership. Now, if you take this in terms of the investments that you're doing, it can make you more profitable. But then the other thing is that you can also move to a different model if it comes to how do you deliver that software to your customer. All of a sudden, you're moving from a license-based model where people pay for a perpetual license. You now move to a subscription-based model where every month revenue is coming in. And they might pay it once a year, but still the revenue is then delivered more or less as a steady stream, which has different financial aspects of running your organization. And for example, not needing the loans to even pay your salaries to your personnel, because you can now just fund that from the revenue stream that's coming in. The other thing is that you can have different models where you pay per active user, which all of a sudden gives different models, but a lot of end customers not always see the fact that pay per user seems simpler and better off because they just pay a couple of euros per user, but in the end they pay more. So it's also a nice way of increasing your price while having more satisfied customers if it comes to the flexibility on onboarding and offboarding users on your software. And then we always have the upsell capabilities where you build in new features and they don't need to install the new software, but they can just do the check mark and all of a sudden they have the new capability and you can then do the upsell. And you can even do try before you buy and all those kind of things to make things happen. And that's really improves the delivery model that you have to your customers and can make a tremendous success. And then if it comes to scale, well, you see a lot of scale benefits because all of a sudden you can scale to almost infinite, I always call it, because we have seen that it's not always infinite. If you just do your best, you can hit infinity, I would say, in the cloud. What you also should do is then refactor to what we call a multi-tenant model, where you have less cost per user. And then the other thing is that you have a much broader market reach, because if you are just online available, why is there a boundary called the Netherlands, or why is there a boundary called Germany or Europe or whatever? You could do it internationally, of course, if your software is not focused on the Dutch market, but that is then another thing. So then the question is, how do you achieve success in this whole set of trends that are going on and the abilities that you get? And that is where I think that the independent software vendors really should embrace those capabilities and trends that are going on in the market. So you should embrace cloud native, you should embrace agility, embrace the higher complexity. So it's embracing all these things instead of looking at it from a fear perspective and say, oh, this is all, what do I do to mitigate it? No, embrace it. And then rethink things instead of optimize things. And that's really crucial. So what you need to do is then, if it comes to your road to success, is take your software as is and please do not start with a complete rewrite of your software, because that is always, well, I would say in 90% of the cases, is that like the road to bankruptcy. So take your software as is and start doing little changes and enablement towards your customers. And then move it gradually to cloud native and take these investment nuggets that you can pick out of the less of cost that you have in capital expense to actually do those investments. By embracing those things like DevOps, SRE, etc., it is like automate everything so that you get into a cadence of constant delivery. And one of the things that we didn't touch on yet, but is really important, is be customer obsessed. Really get a feedback loop in where you get the feedback from your customers. And like I said, you really need to rethink instead of optimize the way you do these things. And to give you a little example is, we worked for a company called Kongsberg Maritime, and they build these kind of rigs, which are complete simulations done on hardware that they deliver. And what is it? About 7 years ago, we came there for the first time in Norway, and we said, "Why wouldn't you want to run this in the cloud?" And then people say, "Well, you're completely nuts. It's impossible." But if you look, what happened is that together with Kongsberg, and by the way, there is also a story on that on Club Cloud, we were able to move a lot of their simulation actually to the cloud. And that even resulted in whole new business models where they now have this notion of simulation as a service, where everybody from a laptop can run a simulation instead of having this big rig that they need. So there are different ways of looking at this, and it's really looking at, are the old constraints still in place? Are the things that we optimized in the past still in place in order to be successful today? And if you think of rethinking instead of optimizing, then it's important to look at these changes that are happening here in the market. It's important to see all these trends that are happening and then translate that into something that you can actually create yourself. For example, based on the fact that we want to do DevOps and we want to do it in a secure way, we need to have secure and compliant, empowered DevOps teams. That would be the idea that you could then say. And then what we often see is then that people say, okay, we're going to do DevOps. So we're going to do DevOps, but we separate deployment or development from infrastructure. Well, this is where I will always say, well, that is close, but no cigar. Right? This is not really DevOps. This is trying to do the same thing that you did over and over again, just put a sticker on it, which is then called DevOps, and then keep doing the thing that you did, and that will set you up for failure. The same thing what we see happening is that we ask our traditional architects with the traditional mindset, the traditional architectural patterns to say, they're going to help us move to the cloud. And then, this is also a really good idea, because what you will get is that you get these toll gates. Because they say, well, you need to comply with my architecture. You need to comply with these different layers. And they will act like a police force instead of what you need is enabled DevOps teams. That means they need to be able to build it and run it constantly. And they need to be enabled. And enablement is much more into a different model. You need to rethink the model and say, no, we are the lifeguards. We are helping the teams deliver to the cloud. We are educating them. And we keep, of course, a little bit of a watchtower over our cloud execution and see, hey, by the way, what is going on there? Because we see all of a sudden a lot of spend and we need to talk to the engineers there what is going on. So it's more like a watchtower idea, the lifeguard idea, instead of the policing that is constantly going on in these organizations. So you really need to rethink the way you run your business. And there's also rethinking the way you're managing your business all the time. So rethink instead of optimize is one of the things that I would say is crucially important to be successful in this new era of cloud. Then I would end this session by saying, well, I think that the way and the key actions to take away from this is that if you are moving to the cloud, find organizations or partners that can help you rethink instead of optimize. Rethink in a DevOps way of work, an SRE way of work, fully empowerment of autonomous teams, and be that lifeguard that can help you and then first show you how to swim, then swim together with you, and then finally you swim on your own. And that's the same with the move to the cloud. We can show you how to move to the cloud. We can then do it together. educate you, and then finally you are on your own, because that's for us always the thing that we strive for. The other thing is that you can treat the cloud as the gateway to modernization of your ISV solution. So this is the moment to embrace all these changes and say, okay, it's a do or die moment, but if we're doing it the right way. We do it this by embracing all these concepts and not just saying, oh, I'm just going to refactor or rewrite my code and that will be the end solution. It's really organizational change, architectural change, software change, and also the managerial change that is required to make this successful. And the final note is, don't try to do everything yourself. Focus on what truly matters. So if you want to get started but want to go to the cloud already, but you don't have the capabilities yet, work with a partner to move to the cloud and then get gradually going on the cloud instead of trying to do everything yourself. And then, with people that are just educated on the cloud, you will make more failures than people that already have a lot of expertise in there. And just leverage that expertise and don't fear it as something that would take it over your business. With that, I come to the end of my talk. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And I want to hand it over back to you, Geert.
One question that came into mind when I was listening to your talk. You said there were a lot of things that companies need to embrace, but how to start? What's the first thing?
The first thing is really, well, I would say the first thing is there needs to be a sense of urgency in the organization. That is really required. If there's no sense of urgency, you're set up for failure. Because that means that from a managerial perspective, from an organizational perspective, you won't be enabled as needed to make the change. So sense of urgency at top level of the organization, the investors of the organization, is crucially important to see that this is necessary. And then what I've seen being successful most is that you augment that with capability. So, for example, in the board of directors, you add somebody that has this knowledge and capability of moving to a cloud company. Get a VP of engineering that already has the capability of the knowledge of moving to the cloud. And then work with them and really also trust on them, build that trust relationship, and then move from there. And then take it one step at a time. So really say, okay, I've got this 30-year-old big ball of mud that I need to move to the cloud. Where do I start? And then take it piece by piece. And then don't try to re-engineer everything because that I think is set up for failure. And then, based on those bits and pieces, that's where you also learn what is more important for you at that point in time, and then put that like higher on the backlog on what needs to be done.
Okay, great. So if anyone in the audience who's watching has any questions to Marcel about this story, please let us know in the chat. Also, the same goes for the people here in at the table. One more thing, Marcel. When you look at your big ball of mud, are there certain areas that you would focus on first? Are there slices that you could take? Like, would you focus on the most important parts of your application first, or maybe some less used area?
Well, there's no one solution that fits all. We work with many different ISVs, and for some it was, we need to start by more or less refactoring or rebuilding or reimagining your user interface. Why? Because they had a standard Windows Forms application, and how do you make that cloud enabled? I mean, that is complex. But we could start off with Windows Virtual Desktop first for every customer and then share that hardware. It was not a cheap solution, but it was a solution to get there and onboard the first customers and find those first customers to move there. And then it was more like we needed to containerize the existing solution, make some changes to the connectivity there, and all of a sudden we could make it cloud aware, I would say. And that's where we then say, okay, let's look at where the most spend is and what makes most sense in terms of investments, where we need to go, and also have the communication and the feedback loop with your customer all of the time and say, okay, what needs to be next? What is that frustrates you most, or what doesn't work for you in this cloud-enabled model? And that's the approach we took with several of customers. Another customer, we came in and we started really re-engineering, in this particular case, the simulation engine before we could make it in such a scale that you could run multiple, for example, simulations on that, and build a plug-in framework there. So it's really dependent on the type of software that you have, type of customers that you have, and then based on that you need to flesh out a plan. And that's one of the things that we do in our cloud assessments. We say, well, look at the code, look at the software, and we do this assessment of 20 days with 2 people, and we come up with a report and say, well, these are the roadmaps that you could take. This would be the more or less the investment, this would be the benefit, this would be the time to move to the cloud and make that happen to get you started, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the notion that well, the cloud is always the enabler, as you said in your story, instead of a goal at itself, right? Absolutely. I see a lot of companies focusing, oh yeah, we need to move to the cloud because, well, everyone's doing that. But there always needs to be a very good reason on why we do it, right? Yeah. And cloud enables a lot of these different areas that you touched upon.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the fun part that you may not have touched yet is that it also enables teams to work in a different way. I think a big thing that we see is trust, right? Because all of a sudden it's not your procurement team that's like buying $500,000 worth of hardware. You're enabling your own teams to be able to spin something up that requires a certain level of trust. And you touched upon this briefly, right? Where like you need to let go of that and be able to say, okay, I trust you do the right thing, even though that may cost me, a couple of bucks.
And not policing it like procurement, but then say like I'm the lifeguard. I'm watching over you, but
exactly.
I trust
enabling that trust, because you said cloud is an enabler of trust in that sense. I think even.
It's an enabler in multiple things. Right. You touched upon it, like autonomous teams that can really focus on the customer itself, and that's something I see at a lot of customers and ISVs is still not the case, that the people developing the software are having the end customer in mind well enough. And when they do this, then when you're focusing on your end customer, then you see, oh, maybe we can do this a little bit better, or really focusing on delivering that value towards the customers. And
and often it's not just adding new capabilities, because often when you see, well, you need to build these new capabilities because customers want those new capabilities. Well, if you have a tight feedback loop with your customer, all of a sudden you see, no, if we can reduce the click stream here, like from 5 clicks to just do it once, they would save like hours a day. And those are the minor fixes that you can do, and you can do it pretty easily, often in place, because you have this new delivery model. And you could even then test it, do some A/B testing on that, because those are the new capabilities that you get in these situations that are not available in your on-premise software.
The good part is actually the cloud itself is the feedback loop already. For many teams, when they start off with, they have actually no idea what this piece of hardware was actually, and what is the cost of a piece of hardware, what is the cost of operation.
Yeah.
So the first moment as a team, you get the bill, like, hey, this is my spend last month, and I was using these services, because that's also not always that obvious. Like, hey, I was using these 5 services. That's the first feedback moment, even without talking to your customers. But there's a realization for a team then. So I'm actually spending money for my employer.
Yeah. And all of a sudden you get cost awareness in your team.
Yes.
You get cost awareness at your architects, and you do cost architecting all of a sudden, instead of just give me a bigger server.
But it's also a very valid thing to say, like if you look at that bill and say, okay, we need to reduce without reducing on availability or quality. Like, how do we do this? How do we then become more cloud native, as you say, right? Like moving it from a VM that's just extremely expensive to something that has a higher yield per dollar. And I think that's what brings it to teams, especially if you have an SRE team that knows how to do that stuff. I think that's really important.
But also on the feedback loop, it also allows you to experiment, right? Because you immediately see what will happen with the technology, what your application will behave without a big investment up front. So I think that's also a part of your storyline in there. But maybe I'd like to emphasize a little bit more that dare to experiment, because if it doesn't work out, it's destroyed by a single button.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. What I very much liked, at a certain moment, I was in a conversation, a customer I was helping, and we had one of their product directors in there. And he was like, okay, so you guys are spending now like $800 a month. So I looked at this bill and I saw this expensive cost, probably some computer or something like that. Can we get that down? And there was a lot of noise in that team. And at a certain moment, one of the senior developers asked, "So if I spend 5 weeks on reducing my bill by 200 euro, this bill by 200 euros, do you think that's a good thing, good investment for the company?" And this was actually the first time that I saw this product director looking like,
Well, maybe not.
maybe not. But it was a very interesting conversation because he never actually, we were talking about leadership as well and experimenting, etc. But this cost awareness and it really changes something there because your conversation just changes and. It actually, in my eyes, it basically puts the wallet back to the team, and the team can then have that conversation. Mm-hmm. What's even more cooler if you have a team who can actually also see what is the income then as well, from the customers. Yeah. And if you look at that bill, you actually quickly figure out that spending your time on optimizing your cloud spending is typically not the best thing to do. Yeah. But it's a great exercise, and if you talk about experimentation, it's a good start. Yeah.
It's a great way to at least have the conversation, right? Yeah. Often the product owner or product manager sees the bill and say, well, having the discussion, can we lower this bill? And maybe the developer says, well, it's way over provisioned. We can just tune this down in 5 minutes and spend a lot of money. Well, that's a good conversation to have. But it could also be, like you said, I need to spend 5 weeks re-architecting this for a couple of $100.
And I think that's also why it's important to first have the board, let's say, buy-in of the cloud transformation, but also to understand what the service is. So I ran into a customer and we had a conversation on the cost of Azure. We spent quite some time on that, and then the business owner stepped in, and then he said, "Yeah, but this cost is, let's say, 2% of the overall thing. So why having this conversation?"
But they were never aware of that spend because it was like at procurement, it was at IT. They had no notion of what was going on, exactly. And now it's really weaving business and IT now together, and that's a big change. Yeah.
And that's often also the pitfall that a lot of companies make at the start, that they still, as you said, look at the cloud as yet another data center. When you don't change these teams and giving the trust to these teams to do their experiments or do things themselves, you're not seeing any of these benefits. And then it's like, we move to the cloud. Yeah. What changed?
Yeah,
Nothing.
Yeah. Right.